Well, everybody, it looks like it's 6:30 by my clock. And I'm sure we'll get some more folks coming in as time goes on, but let's start on time. My name is Patrick Myers. I'm the Executive Director here at the Center Theater, and very glad to welcome you to tonight's public hearing on Zoom about our commercial National Historic District. Doing most of the talking, because he knows most everything about it, is Scott Hanson from MacRostie. I always get that wrong. MacRostie Historic Advisors. Scott's going to have about a 15-minute presentation, and then we'll open it up to some Q&A. And with that, let's see here. Scott, are you live?
I should be. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Let me get those slides up online.
Okay.
Let's see here. All right, hopefully you are seeing the first slide.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Patrick. And as Patrick mentioned, I'm a preservation consultant. I work from my home in Topsom, and I have done more than 30 National Register nominations in Maine over the past 10 or 12 years. Including a number of other downtown commercial districts, including Rumford, Augusta, Waterville, and Lewiston. So I'm happy to be taking on another commercial downtown. And let's go to the next slide, Patrick. So what is a National Register Historic District? What I want to talk about first is what it is not. It is not a local historic district, and a local historic district would come with a review board and a process for making changes to a building. A National Register district imposes absolutely no restrictions on a property owner. No one reviews changes to the building. No one approves changes to the building. No one has any authority to stop changes to a building. The only time a level of review comes into play is if a project is using federal funds or requires a federal permit. And in those instances, the State Historic Preservation Office would review the project and could make suggestions for how to better retain the historic character of the property. But when push comes to shove, they could not, again, stop the owner from doing what they wanted to do. So that is a large misunderstanding about National Register listing that many people have. They think it will come with all kinds of onerous oversight by the government, and in fact, it comes with none. It's really honorary. But what it does come with as an incentive to care for your building is the ability to use state and federal historic tax credits to do work that meets the Secretary of the Interior's standards for rehabilitation. So if an owner chooses to rehabilitate their building using these tax credits, then there is a review process that they've chosen to take part in. And the incentive of those credits is fairly significant. The state historic tax credit is 25% of rehab costs, and the federal credit is 20%. So combined, nearly half the cost of the work can come back in tax credits if an owner chooses to go in that direction. Next slide, Patrick. So this is the area that the State Historic Preservation Commission has identified as a concentration of buildings that meets the National Register guidance for a commercial historic district. And you can see it's focused on the densest commercial part of the downtown, where the buildings start to change to a residential character. The boundary gets drawn to not include those properties. It also does not include properties that are modern or so altered on the edge of the district that they no longer have sufficient architectural integrity to read as a historic building. So for instance, the gas station is not included. It's just trying to take in the buildings that have the character of the historic downtown. At the request, next slide, Patrick. At the request of several property owners, we're going to explore the possibility of extending the district across the bridge to take in a few commercial buildings on the other side of the river. And I don't know if the Maine Historic Preservation Commission will agree that this meets the guidance for National Register boundaries, but because there are property owners interested in being included, we will explore that question and perhaps be able to include these additional properties. Next slide, Patrick. So the reason downtown Dover-Foxcroft qualifies to be a historic district is that it's largely intact from the late 19th and early 20th century. And if you go back to the 1878 bird's eye view, which is on the lower right, you can pick out specific buildings that are standing there today. And if you jump ahead to the 1940s in the photo on the upper left, there's even more that is recognizable today from the historic period. And some of the buildings have been altered, like the Masonic Hall that you see on the right there, but it retains enough of its historic form to be understood for the building that it is, and therefore it's considered contributing and helps tell the story of the development of this commercial downtown. Next slide, Patrick. So when you're doing a National Register nomination, you have to identify what is significant about this property or district that you are nominating to be listed. And there are areas of significance that the National Register recognizes. So 4 areas of significance that are likely to be applicable to this district are architecture, commerce, community planning and development, and entertainment and recreation. And those have to do with the history of the area, how it developed, what occurred there in the historic period, and the role it played in the community's history. So those will be the areas of significance that I will be documenting through research into what the buildings were used for, when they were built, when they were altered, and how they changed, over time, so that each building gets related to one or more of these areas of significance as part of the nomination process. Next, Patrick. So we're just going to go through and look briefly at the buildings in the area that the state has identified. You're all familiar with these buildings. You know them better than I do. But I think it's good to just look at them from this perspective. And for the district, we'll be identifying a period of significance, and that will stretch from when the oldest building was built to a point up to 50 years ago. and the research will help determine where that endpoint gets determined. But it's about the period during which these areas of significance apply. And it's possible that it'll run right up to 1970 because 50 years ago is the cutoff date for the National Register. So if the areas of significance continue through to that date, that's when the period runs to. Next slide, Patrick. So here, this wonderful little Greek Revival brick building with the pizzeria in it is, clearly a building of the 1840s or 1850s. And I believe is one of the earliest within the area we're looking at. So the period of significance will start with whichever building is the oldest. And it may be this one. I'm not certain because I haven't done the research yet. Next. There are also non-contributing buildings within a district typically, and they're buildings that do not contribute to the historic significance of the district because either they've been so altered over time that they no longer read as a historic building, or they were built after the period of significance, and therefore they're not a historic building. They're included within a district boundary if they're surrounded by contributing buildings, but they are not eligible for the use of historic tax credits because they're not considered historic. Next, Patrick. This district also has one building that's already individually listed on the National Register, and that's the Observer Building. It's not unusual for a historic district to have buildings within it that are individually listed because their significance was recognized at an earlier point, or they have a significance in an area that the district as a whole doesn't. And, so sometimes you'll have, say, a district that is largely commercial, but there's one institutional building that's an architectural masterpiece. And that one will likely be listed on its own as an institutional building while the district around it would be commercial. Next. So looking at some of the buildings we have here, clearly eligible for architecture as well as commerce, built as a bank, wonderful architectural style, very characteristic of its period, and one of the most prominent buildings in the downtown, and also really intact from the time it was built. It hasn't been altered a lot on the exterior. So this, is an unquestionable contributing building. Next. This is a much more modest building from a little bit later in time, but also clearly a commercial building. If you wouldn't read this as a house, you would know that this had a commercial use, and therefore it also contributes to the district. Next. This one is a little harder to make a case for either way. The state did end up determining that it would be a contributing building. If you look along the line of the roof, you see two little peaks sticking up that indicate that this started out as two separate little gable roofed 19th century commercial buildings that later got a false front to unite them in a more modern style commercial building in the early 20th century, I would guess. And then it was further modified with changes to the windows on the second floor and the application of the faux brick on the storefront level at some point, I would guess, in the late 20th century. So although it's significantly altered, it still clearly reads as a commercial building. It retains the recessed entries that you expect of a downtown commercial retail structure. And it's right on the line, but it still contributes to the character of the district. Next. And of course, a more obviously contributing building, obviously commercial. These are the buildings that, you know, virtually every town has examples that are similar to all of these buildings. And they have housed hardware stores and pharmacies and clothing stores and restaurants and every other type of downtown commercial retail use you can think of, as well as banks and lawyers' offices and doctors' offices. And so buildings that serve these uses have a particular look and character. And so that's why a commercial district is distinct from a residential district. It's about the fact that we all know these places to be commercial because it's where we've gone to go to the store or the doctor or the restaurant or the movies or the fraternal organization. Those are our downtown commercial district activities that are clearly are part of the history here. Next slide, Patrick. And speaking of fraternal, we have, of course, this wonderful Masonic Hall that we got a glimpse of its earlier appearance in one of the historic images we saw. And fraternal organizations have played a huge role in the history of our communities here in Maine. When I was doing the Waterville Main Street Downtown Historic District, the research showed that at one point there had been 27 fraternal halls on Main Street in downtown Waterville. Virtually every building's upper story had a fraternal hall of one sort or another in it. So these are an important part of the history of our communities and the character of our communities. And so, this one, clearly a prominent building. If you come into town the right way, it's dead ahead. It's, the first landmark. And so with a historic district, if an owner wanted to restore the appearance of that building, to recapture that historic character and detailing, they could use historic tax credits to cover nearly half the costs of doing that work. Next, Patrick. And of course, the entertainment is part of a downtown almost always. And fortunately for Dover-Foxcroft, you've still got this wonderful Art Deco theater. Art Deco is an architectural style that Maine did not get a lot of. It wasn't, it was a popular style in the 1930s, which was not a period in which Maine was doing really well. So there wasn't a lot being built, and therefore there isn't a lot of Art Deco. But one of the things that did succeed through those Depression years was the movie industry, because people needed an escape from the difficult times that they were living through. And so movie theaters got built at a time when other types of buildings were not being built. And so, that history is captured right here in this building. Dover-Foxcroft's only Art Deco building, and still in use as a theater, which is really wonderful because so many of the great theaters from the 1920s and 30s might still be standing, but they haven't functioned as theaters in many years. And of course, the Center Theater is the organization that has put the effort in to make this nomination happen, because it will provide them access to grant funding to help preserve their own building. Next. And as I mentioned, coming into town from the direction I come, the Masonic Hall is, the first thing that stands out, other than the mill across the river. But we're focused on the commercial downtown here. Next. And just another example of a building that, although it's been altered in multiple rounds, I'm sure, from the time the first part of it was built, there's still no question that it's a historic commercial building and still serving in that function. And, the oldest part of it is, I would say, at least 120 or 30 years old. The research will tell me if that's true or how much older. But the fact that these buildings continue to function in the use that they were built for really helps make the case for their significance as part of this commercial district. Next, Patrick. So, a wonderful early 20th century view looking toward the bridge, and beyond the bridge on the left, the original wood Mayo Mill. I'm familiar with that complex because I did that National Register nomination about 10 years ago. And that was my introduction to Dover-Foxcroft, and I had to research the history of that mill complex, which overlaps with researching the history of the community as a whole, because these commercial downtowns are often intimately linked with industry. Something has to create the money for people to spend in a commercial district and has to draw them to that area. And often it's a mill on the river, and then the commercial district grows up around that industrial center. And that's very much the history of what has happened here. So that's my presentation and explanation of what it is and why it qualifies, and I'm more than happy to take any questions.
We're a pretty small group here, so I think if there are any questions, I can dispense with the hand raising and stuff and just go for it.
Yeah, I don't think I have a question, Scott, but I've heard you briefly explain, sort of in defense of this idea to the select board, and but now I'm feeling more excited about the possibilities for our community, and I'm thinking about, gosh, I'm feeling like, when you talk about 50 years ago, I haven't been here that long, but I think about when I first lived here and was a volunteer for woman care that I work for now. Our office was upstairs in what everybody still calls the Koritsky building. And Koritsky's was still open, and that's where you went to get, stuff like zippers and underwear and whatever. Different stores in what was like J.J. Newberry's building that's now in the woods. And so I'm just thinking about this concept of the longevity of a commercial district as something that I haven't thought about before, and to think, oh, well, Pat's Pizza is not the most attractive building and wouldn't excite me as an historic building, but to think beyond its current appearance and the evolution of it as a commercial place is really interesting to me. So I just want to thank you for your presentation, and I did mention this at the select board the other night, but I'm so hopeful that the pizza building could become a sweet little bookshop or something for the, the right person who could take advantage of tax credits and um, create something special there in one of our older buildings. So thank you.
Thank you.
I'll jump in just for a second. Jane had asked earlier whether the district could go up East Main towards Central Hall and the Baptist Church. And I answered her in the chat, but Scott, if you want to give a more informed answer, that probably sounds better.
Yeah, the difficulty with extending in that direction is that the building types change to residential. Where the boundary is currently indicated by the state. So there's a change in the architectural character and the historic significance. Although some of the residential buildings are now in commercial uses, their historic use was as homes. And so that distinction of historic use and architectural character put a boundary there. And it's, I've done a lot of these, and if you have one or two houses and then another 10 commercial buildings, you can jump those few houses and pull them in. But when you've got a fairly substantial space between, the guidance just doesn't allow that to be done.
What's the process from here on out?
The process is I will do the research to document the history of the district, how it developed, when it developed, what the uses were, and evolution over time. And I will write a first draft of the nomination. It'll include that statement of significance, incorporating everything I just described, along with a detailed written description of each building and black and white photographs of each building on film for long-term preservation. And I will submit that draft to the Maine Historic Preservation Commission staff. They will review it and make comments on it and return it to me for any edits and revisions. And there's usually at least a few things that like either clarified or expanded on. And then I return it to them as a final draft, and they will review it again, confirm that it contains everything required for a National Register nomination. And then it moves from the commission staff to the commission itself. And the Maine Historic Preservation Commission is a group of volunteers who meet 4 times a year to review National Register nominations. And so it'll go to their next quarterly meeting. By the time it gets to them, it's been carefully reviewed by staff, and I'm not aware that the commission has ever said no once the staff has said it's complete. So once it's approved by the commission, it gets sent to the National Park Service. In Washington, the staff there will do a technical review of the nomination to ensure that they agree it contains everything it needs to contain. And then it will be posted to the Federal Register for a 45-day comment period. And during the comment period, any member of the public can comment on the nomination. And at the end of 45 days, an individual whose title is the Keeper of the National Register of Historic Places of the United States of America will sign the nomination. and the district will be listed.
So in-
The step I didn't include there is when it gets to the state and they have approved the nomination as complete at the staff level, they will notify every property owner that their property is being considered for listing in a national registered district.
So in your
And-
mind's eye, Scott, from where we are today in early 2021, when does the National Keeper of Historic Places put her signature on it?
I would, depending on how we hit the quarterly rotation for the commission meetings, I would expect by mid to late fall this year, they'll be complete.
This year, okay. Speaking for the local historical society, we'd be delighted to work with you as you do your research. As you know, we've
Great.
got a lot of stuff.
Yeah, you guys were a huge help when I did the Mayo Mill.
Yeah, well, we're happy to press on. Contact us anytime.
I
This is exciting, and I still want to put a pitch in for the Chandler Building by the bridge. Even though it looks different, it's got a lot of historic significance, including a couple of fires that can't be left out, because fires are a big part of our history, you know.
Well, I will be researching those and having that conversation with the state and see if we can get that extra piece in as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Wonderful work.
Yeah, yeah, this is really exciting, and I'm glad you brought up that building, Chris. It has some interesting stories. And then when you think about the possibility of going around to the Hayes Law Firm and Bob's Hardware, or Home and Garden, I always call it Bob's Hardware, but it's not. We're thinking about that, right? I mean, that's like another step or another set of conversations.
Yeah, it's going to start with just getting an understanding of what the buildings are and then talking to the staff at the State Historic Preservation Commission to ask, did you consider these when you were coming up with this preliminary boundary? And what, if you did and determined not to include them, why? And then, I sometimes can make a case for them to reconsider, and have successfully done that on a number of occasions.
Good.
So the key is to do more research than they've done so that I can tell them why it should.
Thank you.
Jane, you had asked why would the district not pass in Scott's experience? Did he answer that question, or do you need more information? You're all set? Okay. All right. Well, last call for questions, comments.
Other than thank you, Patrick. Good work on your part, as always. You're a hero.
Oh, stop. Well, I am.
Okay, you're a schmuck,
You
but
did
you're a hero.
right. You
Yeah.
have the mug, so you are a big damn hero.
At the mug.
I
Maybe
love you.
when I post the recording up on the theater's Facebook page, I'll probably cut it just before that.
Don't do that. Thank you, Scott. Thank you, Scott.
Oh, you're very
Thanks,
welcome.
Scott. Thanks, everybody.
Scott, you have a great job. Great
It's my
job.
dream job.
Great job. All right, thank
All right.
you.
Good night,
Night,
everyone.
everybody.
Thanks for being here, Stuart.
Thanks, Stuart.